I'm very pleased to have a chance to interview Willie Howard, who is a Unite organiser who's involved in some very important disputes at the moment. And I wanted to talk in particular, to begin with, about some of the disputes that are going on the bins at the moment. And I guess that the Thurrock dispute, which I was following closely, and I'm sure many other people were, may have been a bit of a turning point, and it seems to have created a bit of a new mood amongst bin workers elsewhere. Am I right about that?
Well, you are, but the thing with Thurrock was Thurrock was the fifth dispute we've had in about, I think it was about 20-month period. So I wouldn't say that Thurrock is kind of the genesis of this kind of momentum, but the culmination of it rather. Previously we had disputes in Newham, Tower Hamlets, Bexley, and Greenwich, and then we also had a dispute of craft workers in Greenwich Council as well. They're the people who do the maintenance in local authority housing. So it's been building up for a long while. But what you saw in Thurrock was a kind of it was the first time post kind of COVID, or coming towards the end of the COVID kind of lockdown stuff, where things are edging back into normality, and just after the key workers were getting applauded and clapped and all of that stuff, you had a council turning around that was going to cut wages by about 5 and 20%. I mean, they'd argue it's not wages, but it's terms and conditions that would have resulted in that much less take-home pay. But what Thurrock did then is definitely keep that momentum forward and bring it to a kind of a national level. And as a result, we are now seeing probably 3 other boroughs who've come on board with the ideas of getting organised and fighting back.
And where are they?
Well, you've Bexley again. I mean, Bexley had strike action that was pretty rock solid and very well supported March of last year. But unfortunately, the lockdown happened literally, like the first lockdown came in 2 days into the strike. And, the decision was taken to withdraw the strike action as a result, because you had something like 120 people in close proximity outside of a depot. You did have people who were taken ill in COVID as a result of that. We did settle it on the dispute of a pay rise for the lowest paid workers, bringing them from the minimum wage to the London living wage. Full sick pay was brought in for workers, regardless of COVID or any other illness, and that was going to be a contractual thing going forward, which is a massive victory in its own right. There was also a win in removing the local management. However, a year has passed now and there's still outstanding issues, which has led them to return a strike ballot, which we brought in today, which we were pleased to announce. The other 2 then would be Croydon, where again it's outsourced to a company called Veolia, where you're seeing that workers are starting to get organised over issues such as, again, a derisory pay offer from Veolia, which is a massively profitable company, bullying that's rife, overwork, which is very common. A very common complaint you'll find on the dust and cleansing is when a contractor or an outsourcer comes in, the way they squeeze, these companies all have to outbid each other. So they end up actually running on very narrow profit margins. So they're immensely profitable, but each contract isn't actually, runs in a very narrow profit margin. It's just to have so many of them accumulates into kind of super profits. But the way that you keep that margin high, or as high as possible, is by cutting staff, cutting rounds, and trying to squeeze the pips out of people, So that's resulted in a large backlash. We've got a very kind of strong campaign there. We've got new reps elected. We've gone from something like 10% membership to about 55, 60% in the past couple of months, which is a testament to the work that's been done there. And also you have another borough in the southwest called Morton, which is like Wimbledon. And you're starting to see an area that was practically unorganized, where we had a mass meeting last week and things are tipping away there, and often a lot of self-organization that happened. I mean, that was a case of us getting a phone call saying, look, it's all kicking off down here, we're fed up, which is the best phone call to get as a union official, really, but that didn't happen in a vacuum. When I went down and said, oh, did you hear about what happened in Thurrock, or did you hear what happened in Bexley? He was like, oh yeah. And that's the power of these stories and these successes when they're made public.
Tell us a bit about some of the conditions, because I mean, as you say, these outsourcing companies, Serco and Veolia and people, they are absolute cowboys, and I've heard some terrible stories about the kind of conditions people are putting up with.
Yeah, well, I mean, geez, where to start, you know? During the COVID, especially during the early stages of COVID, when I say early, I mean like the first 6 months, you had people who were being put four into a wagon without any masks, without any sanitizers, without any PPE. Um, you know, bullying is a common thing as well, because as I alluded to, the overwork is a chronic issue. So people will often kind of say, more cynical people will go, oh, back in the day, the dustmen used to carry the dust on their back and all of this kind of crack. And they did, and it was a hard job. But nowadays, you're looking at something like the population has trebled, the amount of household has trebled, you know, where once you might have had one dust can per family, what you have now is three wheelie bins, some of them which are filled with garden waste, recycling, refuse, all of that kind of stuff. Um, you know, the average refuse worker covers roughly about, you know, I think it's about 12 miles on foot a day, you know. That's not a small amount. And you're running, if you're a driver, you're jumping in and out of the wagon to help people, that blows your knees out. I mean, this is all just kind of general health and safety stuff, but you know, you might grab a wheelie bin, you don't know what's in it, you don't know what's at the bottom of it. So you're trying to take a bin what you think is full of recycling down a few steps, and it's actually full of 100 kilos of hardcore. You know what I mean? Now, these things happen on the job, and it is a physical job. So I'm not going to say, oh, that's all the fault of outsourcing and things. But I'm just saying it's important to realize that it's still a very physical job and a demanding job. And some people think it isn't. It very much is, you know. Ask anyone after their first week on the dust or walking all day around with a broom how they feel, and you know, you'll know about it. A huge issue so the overwork is a massive issue, as I alluded to, because you know these companies, they cut staff, they increase rounds, they try and get as much work out of people as possible to the point it's completely unsustainable. That then results in miscollections, which is why if you go to any of these boroughs, you'll have residents go, well, I haven't had my bin collected in fucking 3 weeks, you know. But the way that you actually enforce that of trying to get people to work in a sustainable amount is bullying. You know, why didn't you get that road done? Oh, you'll be back here on Saturday. I've seen this with my own eyes. I've seen controllers throwing keys at people. I've seen people burst out and having giant screaming matches in the middle of the yard, 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. If you don't like it, there's the fucking gate, and we'll get another fella in here tomorrow, and blah blah blah. And you know, there is a culture of it. It can be quite a macho culture then, where discipline is imposed kind of by these swaggering figures making threats and all of that stuff, you know. But I tell you this, you find that once the workers get it, like, they're not shrinking violets themselves anyway, people who work in the dust and cleansing, you know, as you can imagine. And you find when they get pretty organized, management back off very, very quickly, you know. So there's a lot of issues, you know. The pay can be derisorily low. Like in some places, the pay is actually quite decent. Like for instance, in Thurrock, you know, and Greenwich, they were probably some of the highest paid refuse workers in the London area. But then you have people in Bexley, for instance, who are working on something like £10.20, which is below the London living wage to drive a HGV vehicle. And then you might also have places like Croydon, where you have a HGV driver on 10.65. And this is the real irony here, Chris, because you get some people go, oh, we'll have someone else in here tomorrow. You fucking won't, because there's a national driver shortage. Now, if I was a HGV driver and someone offered me, I'm going to pay £14 an hour to drive a HGV from one Sainsbury's depot to another Sainsbury's on the M1 and then sit there and smoke fags while it's unloaded, or I'm going to pay a 10.20 to drive a dust cart at 5 o'clock in the morning around South London in the rain, pulling bins, getting abuse roared at you, and cars trying to drive up behind you and all of that stuff. It's an easy choice. Yeah. So the conditions in some places are, I'm not going to suggest every single contract is an absolute bat-hand death march. It isn't, but there are huge amounts of problems. And like many other type of workers, they feel underappreciated and they feel underpaid, because they are underappreciated and they are underpaid.
Yeah. So you've talked about COVID, you've talked about outsourcing, the skill shortage. What are the other reasons that have fed into this? And I mean, do you get the feeling that there's the beginning of a bit of a kind of fight back in general against outsourcing, against some of the worst contracts? I've been down to a picket line at the London Hospital where caterers are taking strike action against Serco. I'm beginning to feel that things might be moving on that front.
Well, definitely. And the first campaign that I was ever involved in organising was BART's, was the original BART strike in 2017, you know. And I remember I was there throughout, though. I think it was the first organizer involved in it, and I was the last organizer like taken off. It was a team of people, like, you know, but I was there from the very beginning of it, months before Serco came in, and you could see the difference. You know, what like the outsourcers, they come in and they promise the clients the world, you know. the clients know full well what they're doing when they're privatizing these people out. So if you stick with Barts, for instance, I know you want to talk about the bins and all of that, but you had a group of primarily African women. I think I remember counting it one day for the laugh, and it was like 82 nationalities or something worked there, overwhelmingly migrant workforce, people who do a vital job within the NHS. And they were deliberately lied to by the trust. Like, we had the facilities manager in the Royal London going around. I saw him do this. Oh, you're not leaving the NHS. You're still in the NHS. Don't listen to the union. Oh no, of course you're going to be in the NHS. We're all a family here. And they weren't going to be in the NHS. They were going to be deliberately transferred out of the NHS on poor, with all existing new hirers or hirees being taken on in poor terms and conditions. And the first thing that Serco did when they came in was to cut the tea break of 10 minutes. Which led to a mass walkout in the job, occupying the Royal London canteen. It was great fun. But the trust basically look for an opportunity to cut corners, and councils will look for an opportunity to cut corners. Now, the reason for that, and we have to look at the bigger picture here. The reason of that is, people talk about austerity in this kind of vague, pervasive kind of sense. It's the boogeyman, it's like bad weather, or it's like an act of God, austerity. It's nearly become that. But the reality of austerity is that public services that we rely on are so cut to the bone. Hospital trusts, local authorities, county councils, whatever, make decisions, but they often make them in the crudest way because they cut them at the bottom. And the reason is, it's like, sure, it's the bin men, and a lot of it is rooted in a type of snobbery, Chris, because the hospital trust employee, director of strategy or whatever, getting paid 130 grand a year, he's rarely affected by this stuff, but he'll often think, well, why should a hospital cleaner be able to get full sick pay? Why should a bin man, be on £13.50 an hour? Anyone could do that job. This is the real world. This is the world that we live in. It's a market economy, all of this stuff. And that's often the logic that underpins these decisions, So they often don't think twice about it, about chopping the African cleaners, chopping the bin men, because the type of people making these decisions don't know any of these people. You're into kind of social, kind of British class dynamics there, but the people who make these decisions, they don't go down and drink at the same pubs as the bin men do. And their kids don't go to school with Adjua's kids from the Royal London, They don't, and so, you're looking at a position of central government cuts and then a kind of senior people within local authorities and within the NHS and within our public services will then pass that on to the lowest paid. And the reason is because we're often so unorganized there, they get away with it. They do get away with it. That's the unfortunate thing. We see some of the iconic fightbacks, like Barts, like Thurrock, like these things. But the fact is for every one of those workers, there's 10 or 15 who just get shoved into some cowboy outfit and don't feel they have any recourse whatsoever,
Sounds like they think it might be, the tide might be turning a little bit now. But so what are you thinking about a strategy here? It sounds like there's a kind of, in South London at least, the refuse workers are beginning to take a stand. You're hearing one or two other stories from around the country. How do we move towards a kind of, trying to make this a more generalised?
Well, the plan that we've signed off, and I can just talk from my own perspective in a practical sense. The first ever kind of dust strike that we organised, that I was involved in, was Nineham, and the council made a pay promise years ago that turned out to completely reneged on, costing our members thousands. I won't go into the details here. Local government pay deals are often very labyrinthine and very, very complex anyway. So we ended up having a strike ballot. We didn't have to go out in the end. We did win. We did win across the board. It was a great victory. And then we just got the idea. It was like, hold on a second, I've never met a happy bin man. And then as you started going around the place to our different shops, we saw it. So kind of the short-term strategy we had was, first of all, see what else is out there, identify the lay of the land. The medium-term strategy is then export the victory that we had in places like Nineham, that we had in places like Greenwich, and then build on that. And the next step for that now is, you're heading into the medium strategy, is to form a combine, as we'd call it. And that's to take the reps from every contract where Unite has a shop and bring them together. Not in a kind of a vague local authority, thing, which could mean 1,000,001 jobs. And that's not to disrespect any of the local authority committees and stuff. But what we need to do is to organise the job, and this is my personal opinion here. Trade unions, and I'm not just talking about Unite or here, but the trade union movement in general has a habit of doing multiple different pay deals across the same company, same company even. So you have a worker in Veolia in Morton will get paid £2 less than a Veolia worker in Haringey, and £3 less than one in Tower Hamlets. That doesn't make any sense for doing the same job. So what we need to do is to organise the job. You know, if you're a hospital, and that's what we did in Barts. If you're a hospital cleaner in this hospital, in these five hospitals, 6 hospitals, this is the rate for the job. This is what you should be on. You know, and if we look at like kind of back in history at more kind of successful organizing initiatives, you know, like in America, you had the Teamsters, the great Teamsters strike in Minneapolis and stuff. They didn't say we're going to do one job for Joe Bloggs Trucking and another one for Jay Dennehy Trucking. They were saying, if you're a bin man in this area, or sorry, if you're a lorry driver, this is the rate for the job, and anyone not paying that is going to get a visit from us, and we're going to organize and we're going to strike in the back of it. So we hope to set this combine up very soon after the summer. And the next thing then is what we need to do, in my head, is have a big map of London. And when you click on the borough, you know, it'll come up. How much density do we have? You know, is it a Unite shop first? Maybe it's the GMB, maybe it's Unison, in which case I won't be involved in it. But if it's a Unite shop, what's our density? Do we have a rep? What's their rate of pay? What's their last pay anniversary? And then it's not a case of, obviously, look, you know, full-time organisers and officials can support, and that is our role, you know, and it's a role that I do actually believe in. But what we need to do is create a rank and file movement whereby that I can call up and say 20 different bin men from 4 or 5 different boroughs and go, we're going down to X borough on Thursday morning. I'll take a day's leave. We'll have a few pound maybe to cover that, and go down and speak to them. And I tell you, like the difference when you get other bin men to come along, like in Bexley, we had a meeting. We're trying to build up for the strike again. There's a bit of cynicism, a bit of fear, a bit of trepidation, all of that kind of usual stuff. And then you get a carload of fellas from Thurrock who've just come over and said, we've come over the river and we've done him over here, and you should do the same. You can just see it changes so quickly, you know. We had John, who's the branch secretary of I won't say his name in this in case he gets in trouble, but one of the East London places where there was a very powerful strike, and he came down and just said, look, you're all getting shot on, you know, this is exactly what we did. You should do the same.
Yeah.
And it's so much more powerful. So we need to create a vibrant rank and file movement, a bit like the electricians have at the moment. Organize the job, irrespective of the company, irrespective of the site, organize the job and use that rank and file power to affect industrial change, and use that as a kind of a spearhead to bring other people along. Long term, then we want to be, you know, this is my opinion, what we should be doing is looking at harmonizing across the board. Why should a bin man in Bexley get paid 10.20, but a bin man in Greenwich gets paid 13.50, and they're right next to each other? It doesn't make a lick of sense. And why is we as a union not organising around that? And
what about bringing these things in-house as well?
100% we should be bringing them in-house, you know, absolutely we should. The thing is outsourcing needs to go. Outsourcing across Britain needs to go. It's failed in everything, like, and I can't think of any examples where it's done a better job. You know, you look at prisons. We hand the prisons over to G4S. They end up running some deportation halfway house, from what I can see, called Booth House, I think it was called, where they were sticking 14-year-old Afghani refugee children in with hardened drug dealers. Do you know what I mean? Or what was that prison as well? I can't remember the name of it, where they're beating the fuck out of prisoners. Do you know, like anything? The G4S, how they wrecked the Olympics, Sorco and the track and trace, an absolute national embarrassment. You know, and they're still being given contracts. You know, Veolia, you know, the buses, everything, all of it has just resulted in a worse public service and worse treatment for the workers who actually deliver the service, the so-called key workers that we're also concerned about these days. So, of course, we need to, you know, and there has been successful strikes occur in London. I know in St. Mary's Hospital, the UVW, I think it was, forced an in-housing on the back of a strike. And yeah, we shouldn't be afraid to aim that big, you know?
Yeah. No, excellent. That's very inspiring. So what about, finally, a message to other people who might be watching this in other unions or workplaces, or just ordinary people who want to try and give some support, maybe are watching these disputes? How do we deliver solidarity?
It's a big question. Obviously, you know, obviously these struggles need to be led by the workers themselves. I mean, there's loads of stuff you could do. You know, you could collect money for the strike fund. I mean, that often kind of sounds pedestrian, but it's very, very important. You know, like in Thurrock, we had barbecues, food, music, and stuff. All of that had to be paid for, like, and it all came out of donations. You know, which we got. If you're in a union branch, and you know that you have similar issues, then I would voice in my union branch, can we get one of these people from this union branch to come and speak to us about how they did it? You know, and then start. I mean, I could be here all day telling you how I think branches should operate and how they actually do, you know. There's stuff like you could be doing on social media with it. It all sounds very boring, Chris. I could give you a long shopping list of it and it would sound boring. I mean, people know what they need to do, you know, and that's often having the conversations, having real face-to-face conversations rather than getting into social media barneys. writing to MPs, writing to councillors, demanding of their councils. And like, if you have a Labour council and they're looking to privatise stuff, I would demand an explanation why it's happening, you know. And that, you know, and I would highlight these aspects, and I wouldn't, you know, I would try and make it as difficult as possible for people to just slide this in as business as usual, because it's not business as usual, you know. It's handing taxpayers' money over to vultures, you know. So it's to say, I mean, organise and fight back. I think that's the best thing. That's what we need to do. We're at a very, very low base, unfortunately, you know.
Oh, but that's brilliant. Thanks so much for talking to us, Willie. It's very, very inspiring, and it's great to see people fighting back. It's going on under the radar, and we really need to get the word out about these disputes. So full support for everything you're doing, and thanks very, very much.